Hi there, I'm Carol Tomlinson, and I'd like to spend a couple of minutes with you answering a question some teachers have asked recently, and for obvious reasons, and that is, what are some things you can do to try to reach out to meet the different interests and needs of students that you're trying to teach online? So I want to spend just a few minutes chatting with you about that, and would like to commend you first for doing really important work under really difficult circumstances in a really stressful time. I presume you're in a position to hear back from students, but I have the option of hearing from many school leaders and parents of students who are really appreciative of the work that you're doing. And so one of my pieces of advice to you would be, remember every day how much you're accomplishing and give yourself credit for that. Second thing I'd like to say to you is, of course, and this is not something that's new to you, but many of your students are frustrated, they're afraid, some of them are angry, and some of them are probably living in places where they're mistreated or not well fed. Remember those things as you begin to work with them, and as much as you can, when you're planning, lead from your heart as well as from your brain. You've heard this before, but until Maslow's needs are met, Bloom is cut off at the pass. And so taking time to talk with the kids, to share good and not so good things, to laugh with them when you can, to tell them some of your crazy stories is really worth some time and probably means more for 10 or 15 minutes than a lesson that you could plan for that length of time. I think my major piece of advice in terms of planning is, if you possibly can, give up that notion that you have to cover a certain amount of science, or there's a certain amount of time period that you have to cover in history, or you have to read a certain number of stories or a particular novel. Some of those things may be what you land on doing anyhow. But again, when kids are under stress and everything is uncomfortable, tense for them, the chances that they're going to remember all of that vocabulary or all of those names and dates and places are not real high. And so I think it's really helpful if you back up and say to yourself, what really matters that the kids can grow in this semester? What are the really big things? If you were going to come up with a few pieces of knowledge in science, what would those top 5 be? If it's a time period that you're working on in history, what's the big storyline you want them to remember? For so many of you, could it be that really what you want is for kids to get a little bit better with reading, with writing, and focusing on those big things gives you a whole lot more room to give kids choices then, and to make sure that whatever choices they make are focused on those big things that you think really matter. In almost all subjects, it matters that kids learn to write more clearly, more persuasively, or more logically, or with more interesting wording. And they can do that in a whole variety of topics or interest areas, or even themes within a history unit. In almost every instance, it would be really helpful if kids learn to read more fluently. So if you could give them something that you want them to read that seems appropriate, and then also some audio to go with that where someone else has read it and they can listen as they read. Most of the time, for most of us, good audio augments our comprehension from print. And for many kids, of course, that audio gives them a way in. You're familiar with this more than I am, I'm sure, but of course there's so many podcasts that are wonderful that relate to time periods or scientific concepts. Just really many things kids can do that get to that big picture and yet really attend to particular interests and needs that they have. Related to that, once you have come up with something big and clear that you want them to do, give them as much choice as you can. Okay, guys, so here's some things you have to show me that you know, and some things that you have to be able to do. And here's an understanding that you need to play with so that you can demonstrate that you've really wrapped your head around that. But you can do that in a lot of ways. I've come up with 2 ways I think you could do it, and so I'm going to explain those to you. But if you have a third way or a fourth way or a fifth way, let me know about that and we'll work on that, because what matters to me is that you're working with these ideas and these things you need to do. And I'm happy to have you do that in ways that you think are kind of worth your time. I think it's really helpful to ask kids something that they'd like to learn in a time like this. I read a Facebook post the other day from a woman who I only know because she's on Facebook. But she was talking about a time when a really bad flood hit her town when she was a little girl. And in the beginning, her neighbors and her parents prepared to run up a mountain with the kids because that was the only way to escape the flood. Their houses were right on the precipice of where the flood was coming. And so they gathered all their belongings and went halfway up the mountain, and then were able to see that the flood had just barely missed their houses, but it had missed them. And so they went back down the mountain, but they couldn't get out of the houses for a really long time. And she says when she looks back on that now, what she remembers is that her mother taught her how to bake something. And she worked on her father with something that he was working on and learned how to be able to use some tools. And in the conversation with both parents, she heard stories about them that she had never heard before. And she said, ironically, when I look back at my childhood, I look at that as a good time because of the opportunities that I had to interact with my parents in ways that I hadn't been able to do before, and that made a difference. So again, if you can let kids learn, do, make, create, think about some things that they'd like to do, and then help them build some structure on that, that would be super. Even if you're an elementary teacher and you have so many different things to do with them, if one piece of it could be that sense of personal exploration and investigation, that would probably be a great thing. Many of you use technology with teaching far better and more contemporarily than I do, but there's so many apps in addition to human ingenuity that you can use that if you have them working on an idea in history or something that you'd like for a performance assessment in science or a particular kind of writing you'd like in literature, or in world language vocabulary that kids have to work with. Think about offering them different ways that they can practice and show you what they've learned. Flipgrid is a great thing for that, depending on whether you have a license or not. Soundtrap is really excellent. But kids can write their own skits. They can make their own vocabulary scenarios and cards. They can create characters that parallel characters in history or in a story that they're reading. So thinking about perhaps there are things that you need them to do together that are maybe more restrictive, but in the end, there's many different ways that they could demonstrate to you what they've learned, and that would be really helpful as well. When you can, if you have the technology, think about meeting with the kids in clusters. When you do that, it lets you address the needs of a few kids, 3, 6, 5, 7, whatever you can do. And those clusters might be formed around interests, or they might be formed around a particular skill set, or some of them may be kids that are pushing the envelope and need a little bit pushed further to be able to continue to grow. Those smaller groups also give them a really great chance to interact. And of course, anytime you can build in interaction in your lesson plan so that they can practice together, or they can share together, or give each other feedback, that gives them that sense of belonging that I think pretty much everybody needs right now as well. So collaboration is another really important piece. And in the end, take time every day again to reflect on all you've accomplished, both with your professional work and in your living circumstances right now. And remember that you need to be able to keep your bones together well so that all those folks who depend on you can keep their bones together better as well. So try a few things, do them with some attention, but don't try to do too much for too many people. In the end, this is probably a great time to tap into the meaning that you derive from teaching and share that with the students and help them look for some meaning and for some self-understanding and agency as well. Stay well, take care of yourselves, breathe deeply, and I hope before too long you'll feel that you can breathe the outside air again. I'm looking forward to that as well.